So between the last video I made and this one, I found both my glasses and my necklace. My glasses were in the car where I left them after I went running, and the necklace was next to my bed where it's supposed to be. I'm gonna do the 20th century tag. I was tagged by AJD, and I will leave a link to hers and to the original in the description. It is pretty straightforward. You go through the decades of the 20th century and pick a book from your collection that fits in that decade. The only decades that I really struggled with were 1910 and 1930, and I had to do some creative Google searching to figure out what was published in those years, and then, you know, cross-reference with my collection. For the 1900s, I have Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett, which I read a couple of summers, 3 or 4, I guess, summers ago, when I was thinking about getting licensed to be a librarian, but I think it was before I started my doctorate. And I took a children's literature class, and this is one of the books we read. I read Secret Garden ages ago. I've seen the Little Princess movie also ages ago. I think it was something I watched when I was a kid. And they were fantastic. I'd never read the book, and it's also quite fantastic. Forward, 1910s. For the 1910s, I have Dubliners by James Joyce. This was published in 1914. This one I read because it was assigned for one of my literature classes after I became an English major in college. My favorite English professor, too. I took a couple of classes from her. I really understood medieval, this is not medieval lit, but I really understood medieval lit after taking her class because she gave us historical context, and that made it make so much more sense. For the 1920s, I have the autobiography of an ex-colored man by James Weldon Johnson, which I read for my black literature class in college, and I'm gonna stop saying that these things were fantastic because I wouldn't show them to you if they weren't fantastic. Wow, wait a minute. Ooh. I think I made a boo-boo. This was first published in 1912. And then it was republished in 1927. I'm leaving it, even though it was republished in 1927. And even though there were some other things that I wanted to put in the 1920s, and I picked this one anyway. Anyway, 1927. For the 1930s, we have Steinbeck of Mice and Men. For whatever reason, my district is really, really big into Steinbeck. I think every single year, even with the vast amount of literature there is, every single year the kids have to read a Steinbeck novel. What's up with that? For the 1940s, I have Black Boy by Richard Wright, which was published in 1944. I also read this for my black literature class. And it's one that I tried to get my brother to read, or I recommended my brother to read, but it's a little more thick than what he would actually read. So, hey Don, if you decide you want to take on a tome, here, this is tome for you. Here you go. For the 1950s, we have a book published in 1952, and that is Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. This is not my favorite of his pieces. I really liked his short story, Sonny's Blues. And now we skip exactly 10 years to 1962, and we have One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. This is not my original copy. I had to replace my original copy. So here's the skinny on this book, and why I love this book so much. I read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as a senior in high school. And when I was a senior in high school, that was the same time that the Real Slim Shady music video was produced. So I'm, you know, watching MTV or VH1 or whatever music channel when they actually played music videos in the morning. Before school, while I'm waiting for my sister, and I see the Real Slim Shady video, and I'm looking at it, it's like, Nurse Ratched! And this is why we read, people! So that when we watch music videos, we get the jokes. No, I mean, that's not the only reason why we read, but that was one of those, oh my god, there is value in reading this literature. One of those moments for me as a 17-year-old trying to figure out why I have to read this stuff. For the 70s, a book published in 1979 that before I show you, it's one of those books that made me feel like it's okay to be African American and like sci-fi, and that is Kendra by Octavia Butler. in my women in literature class in college, which could also have been called feminist lit the way we did it. This was the only book that I read all the way through. Bad English major. Bad English major. The only book that I read all the way through. It was fantastic. I read it in one sitting, and then I went out and told everybody that they needed to read it because it is so incredibly awesome. And it's historical fiction, and it's science fiction, and there's time travel, and oh my god, it's so cool. And I'm gonna take this one and not put it back on the blue shelf, but stick it on my TBR shelf because I want to read it again. Fantastic. Read this book. It is so cool. It's not YA. It really isn't YA. But it is so cool. Okay, moving on. For the 1980s, I've got Voices After Midnight by Richard Peck, which was published in 1989. I don't know what my obsession with this book is, because it's just kind of as an adult. But I spent years trying to find this book. This is a nostalgia book. Years trying to find this book. Because I remember that there was a thing with an elevator in a house, but I couldn't remember what the title was, and it took me a really long time to hunt this down. 1989, Richard Peck, Voices After Midnight. In 1990, you will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. 1990, so far so good. Gil Scott-Heron. I stole this from my dad. Because Gil Scott-Heron was my first introduction to the world of slam poetry, and is so incredibly awesome. I still listen to him, and I still listen to slam. And we come back to, we see the revolution will not be televised, like, everywhere. So, thus endeth my 20th century tag. That was really fun. I enjoyed doing it. Thank you, AJD, for tagging me. I'm not going to tag anybody because I don't want to tag people who've already done it, and I've been kind of on hiatus from YouTube really for the last couple of weeks. I'll get back into it, start watching the things that y'all have done. So that's it. The revolution will not be televised, will not be televised, not be televised, be televised. The revolution will be no rerun, brother. The revolution will be live. Happy reading. Don't forget to be awesome.